I'm terrified that something's going to happen to my father. I don't know why. I just have this terrible fear. And for my girlfriend, that something's going to happen to her, too. And I've sudden impulses to do things. Something from inside suddenly orders me to do things.
What kind of things?
I get a command to cut my throat with a razor. I know it's silly, and then I'll do something to stop myself doing it. I've wasted my life, really, trying to fight my ideas. That's why I've only just passed my law exams. I'm 29. It took me 9 years. These thoughts, it's like being aware of my own voice. Only I'm not actually speaking.
Vienna, 1906, capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Still the traditional city of Strauss, pretty women, aristocrats, and soldiers. But Vienna was also the center of the new, emerging science of psychoanalysis. Dr. Sigmund Freud, as a young doctor studying mental illness, had been fascinated by the concept of the unconscious mind and how its hidden workings can affect our everyday life. Most of Freud's patients were from the Viennese middle class. Their problems and behavior led him to believe that the cause of much mental illness lay buried in our unconscious mind, and that it is the repressed, forgotten experiences of our childhood that make up the unconscious. Freud, a practicing analyst of 20 years' experience, was now 50, still researching, still learning from the experiences of his patients.
I don't have intercourse very often. I don't have the opportunity. I find prostitutes disgusting. I feel I've got normal sexual desires, but somehow my sex life has been stunted.
If I may ask you this, how old were you when you first had sexual intercourse?
I was 26.
And how long have you suffered from your ideas, your obsessions?
Ever since I was a child. But particularly strongly in the last 4 years.
And what made you come to see me?
I'd heard about you, and so I came to see you.
The patient was a lawyer and reserve officer in the Austrian army. Although Freud was not yet aware of it, the man was on the verge of a complete mental breakdown. The repeating pattern he experienced of commands to do things, followed by attempts to prevent them, had reduced his life to a series of senseless rituals. His visit to Freud was a desperate attempt to find a cure.
Let's leave it then that you will think about it, and you can let me know tomorrow.
I'll talk it over with my family. How shall I pay you?
You can pay me monthly, by installments.
Then so many florins for so many rats. I'll see you tomorrow, then.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Freud could only guess at the extent of the patient's illness. But if the unconscious is the product of repressed childhood experiences, it was these forgotten events of childhood that Freud would have to uncover. Freud already noted that the patient's fears that something was going to happen to his father and his girlfriend were essentially childlike. Throughout the period of treatment, Freud made detailed notes on the patient's condition. He used these as the basis for the lecture he gave to the first ever Psychoanalytical Congress in 1908. In the past, Freud's ideas had often met with hostility and dissension, but the Ratman case was to provide the most dramatic confirmation of his theories.
Gentlemen, the crumbs of knowledge that I'm about to offer you may not in themselves prove very satisfying, but they may serve as the starting point for the work of other investigators. Common endeavor may bring the success which lies perhaps beyond the reach of individual effort.
Freud's unique achievement was to penetrate the inner workings of the mind. He did it by devising a completely new technique in his approach to the patient.
The day after our first meeting, I made him agree to the only condition of treatment.
You must say everything that comes into your head, even if it's unpleasant for you, or seems unimportant, or irrelevant, or even senseless.
I've always been tormented by criminal impulses. I used to ask my friends, in fact I still do ask them, whether they despise me as a criminal. They tell me that ever since I was quite small, I've always taken a dark view of my life. I don't know why. I was happy. I was very close to my father. I have been all my life. We could always talk to each other about anything. Except one thing. We had at home a pretty young governess called Fräulein Peter. This scene came into my head quite distinctly years later. She was lightly dressed, and I was lying beside her, and I begged her to let me touch her. And she said that I could, as long as I didn't tell anyone about it. She had very little on, and her body struck me as being very strange. She allowed me to take a great many liberties with her. It left me with a burning and tormenting desire to see the female body. I can remember more things from my 6th year onwards. I can still remember with intense excitement. We had another governess who was also young and good-looking. She used to take her clothes off and stare at herself in the mirror at night. I used to wait, burning with curiosity to get a good look at her. When I was 6 years old, I already suffered from erections. I had the feeling that there was some connection between them and my inquisitiveness. And I had the morbid idea that my parents knew what I was thinking. But I had an uncanny feeling that in thinking these thoughts, something awful must happen. And that I must do all sorts of things to prevent it from happening.
Can you remember any of these fears?
Even when I was young, I couldn't help thinking about my father's death. And it upset me a great deal. Now I still have these fears. Fears that something can happen to my father. My father died several years ago.
Then no harm can come to him.
Yes, I know that. But I'm still afraid for him.
He'd formed an obsessional neurosis based on his childhood sexual experiences. This had produced a conflict in his young mind. Side by side with an obsessive wish to see the female body was an obsessive fear that his father might die, an erotic instinct, and the reaction against it. The obsessive fear he had for his father at the age of 5, more significantly, the same fear he was having as a man 24 years later. Why?
I want to start today by describing the experience that first made me come to you. It happened while I was on maneuvers. I lost my glasses, and I wired my opticians in Vienna to send me another pair by the next post. During the same halt, I sat with a Captain Novak when we had a long argument about corporal punishment. He was all in favor of it. And I was afraid of him because he was obviously very cruel.
If you don't beat them, you torture them. I could tell you a good one. They do it out east. It'd be a good idea if we used it here. You take your 10 or 12 men, however many you've got, and you line them up in front of a wall. Then you take one of them as an example, and you strip him. And you lay him face down in front of the others. And you peg out his arms and his legs, spread-eagled so that he can't move.
Then what happens?
I'll tell you what happens.
I can't talk about it.
But if I'm to treat you successfully, I must help you to talk about it. To talk about all the things that worry you. Was the prisoner impaled?
No. No, not that. They, put a pot upside down.
Over the prisoner's ass. And press it down tight.
On his buttocks.
Then you get some furry old rats that you've kept specially. And you put them under the pot. One by one. Of course, it's not much fun for the bloke with his bum under the bucket. Because there's only one way for the rats to get out. And you know what that is, don't you?
They bored their way in.
Into his anus.
I suddenly had the idea that this was happening to somebody very important to me.
And who is that?
A lady. A lady I admire very much. I find the idea quite alien to me. I don't usually think like this. Honestly, it just flashed through my head. I kept saying to myself that I wouldn't let it happen. I wouldn't. And that was how I warded them both off.
I don't understand that. Both.
Yes. I also had the idea of the punishment being done to my father.
You had this idea even though your father's dead?
That same evening, the same Captain Novak brought me a parcel that had come by post.
Captain. Captain. I have a package for you from the village post office.
It contained my glasses. The new ones from Vienna. The ones I'd sent for.
Lieutenant Alex paid the postage for you. You'll have to pay him back.
I won't pay him back or the rats will get my father. These were just ideas. So, I changed my mind. Yes, thanks. I will. I made a vow. So the rats wouldn't get them. The order came into my head that I must pay the money to Lieutenant Alex, as Captain Novak had told me.
And did you?
I tried all day, and for the next 2 days, to get the money to him. But I couldn't find him. Then I met him myself and paid him, but he refused it. He said he wasn't working at the post office any longer and that he hadn't paid the postage. It had been paid by Lieutenant Brown. So I couldn't keep my vow. I couldn't keep my vow, Captain. I couldn't keep my vow.
What did you do then?
I made a plan. I'd go to the post office with Lieutenant Alex and Lieutenant Brown together. And I'd ask Lieutenant Alex to give the money to the girl behind the counter. Then she could give it to Lieutenant Brown, so he'd be paid back. And then I'd pay Lieutenant Alex myself, so he'd be paid back by me. And I'd keep my vow and save my father from the rats. But I was a coward. I've always been a coward. Ever since I was a little boy.
Why are you a coward about paying the money back?
Well, I didn't want to appear a fool. I couldn't face asking the lieutenants to do such a crazy thing. I couldn't decide what to do, whether to go through with my plan or run away. I went to the station. The porter said 10 o'clock train, sir. I said yes. It was fate. The 10 o'clock train didn't go to the post office.
To the post office?
To the town where the post office was, Captain. It went to Vienna. So I went to Vienna. And the next day, I put the money in a letter and sent it to the girl in the post office.
He must have known all along it was really she who had paid the postage on his glasses. Why had he not acknowledged it before? I sent the money to the girl at the post office. That was the clue to the truth behind the whole incredible story. What was he trying to hide? Why was he deliberately suppressing the knowledge it was she who had paid the postage for him? Why choose instead to build up a strange, senseless obsession involving rats, his father, his girlfriend, and money payments to the two lieutenants?
Something which I consider most important torments me. My father had emphysema. The night he died, I asked the doctor when the crisis would be over. He told me the next day. So I went to bed. My father died that night. It never entered my head that he might die. I still can't believe that he's dead. It wasn't until about 18 months after he died that I began worrying about it. I began to think of myself as a criminal. That I hadn't been there when he died was unforgivable. I wasn't there when he died. And so I'm a criminal.
Let me try to explain. What we have to do is to find the right connections. To connect your feelings of blame, of guilt, self-reproach with what really caused them. You see, none of us is used to having strong feelings that we can't account for. And so we look round for a possible cause. We seize on the first thing that seems reasonable. Now, you've seized on the fact that you were absent from your father's deathbed. But you've made the wrong connection. The real cause of your strong feelings lies in some unknown experience lodged in your unconscious. What we have to do is to make it conscious and then make the right connection.
Then you're saying that my feelings of being a criminal towards my father are justified?
Probably, yes. For some reason we don't know. But at this stage of your treatment, you'll find that difficult to accept.
I'll never accept it because it's impossible. I never was a criminal to my father. And even if I did accept that those feelings were justified, I can't see how that can help.
Merely accepting your feelings won't help. But it may help you to remember the events that gave rise to those feelings. The events still buried in your unconscious.
I'd like to talk about my father. I have some photographs of him. I always carry them. He was a very good man. But always very kind. We were the best of friends. He was a soldier. This is just a train of thought. There's no sense in it. When I was 12, I fell in love with a little girl. But she wouldn't love me. And I thought that the only way she'd love me was if my father died. And she'd be sorry. But I put the idea out of my head. Really, it passed very quickly through my mind. It was nothing.
Can you remember thinking of your father's death on any other occasion?
Yes. It was about 6 months before he died. It wasn't important.
Well, tell me anyway.
My mind's gone blank.
I'm sure it's very painful to remember.
I can't remember. It was one of those thoughts that if he died, I'd have the money to get married. But I put it out of my head.
But if he had died, it would have been an advantage to you.
I didn't mean it.
But it would have been an advantage, wouldn't it?
Yes. I was still very much in love with her at the time. I'd known her for over 10 years. I had the same thought the day before he died. I was frightened by it. I didn't want his death.
But you did want it unconsciously. You see, every fear is a repressed wish. You wished your father dead, and then felt anxious, afraid, guilty. So I have to believe the exact opposite of what you're saying.
I'd have given up everything to have saved him.
Such intense love is what is suppressing your hate.
Given up my own happiness.
3 times since you were a little boy, you wanted your father dead so you could have money to marry the girl you loved.
I love her, but I never want her, sensually. Not in the way that I was aroused by my nursemaid when I was a child.
Your normal sexual desires have been stunted by your childhood experiences. And you see your father as standing between you and the object of your sensual desires. And you've loathed him for it ever since you were a child.
You're wrong. I loved him. Loved him. I think I ought to be killed. Why should I live when he died?
You repressed your hate, buried it before the age of 6.
I tried to kill my brother once, when we were boys. I loaded my toy gun with a ramrod, and I told him that if he looked down the barrel, he'd see something. And I pulled the trigger. It didn't hurt him very much. But I meant to. I did this, says my memory. You cannot have done this, says my pride. But you did, says my memory.
March the 18th, 1908. Freud had been treating the patient for 5 months.
The patient is slowly moving towards a recognition of his hostility towards his father. He has denied the hostility, but he does remember feelings of hostility to the brother he loved. The same hostility is also present in his attitude towards his girlfriend.
We were out on the lake, boating. She liked being in a boat. But I was afraid that she'd catch cold. She wasn't really dressed for boating. I asked her to put on my hat. She refused. She said it would look silly. But I made her. It's going to rain.
I don't think so.
You'll get wet. You ought to have something more on.
No, I'm perfectly all right. Really, I am.
Put my hat on. It'll keep you dry.
No, I'm all right, Paul.
Put my hat on.
I look silly.
Put my hat on.
No.
Put it on.
No.
Put it on.
I won't.
Put it on.
No.
Put it on. Put it on. Put it on.
Stop it.
Nothing must happen to her. I've vowed it.
Nothing must happen to her. Ever. I was waiting for her. I hadn't seen her for several days. But there was a stone in the road. And I thought, if the wheels of her carriage struck the stone, she could be killed. I took it away and put it to the side of the road.
You want to protect her. You vowed nothing should happen to her.
I thought how absurd I'd been. I put it back where it had been in the first place.
You want her living, you want her dead. The wish to do damage, the wish to protect. They're a compromise in the battle between love and hate.
Nothing must happen to her. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17,
Count to 40 before the thunder. She'll die. She'll die. She'll die.
The 7th, the 8th, the 9th, 40, 40. 40. 40.
Why are you so angry with her? There must be a reason why you're so angry and have to protect her. Perhaps she doesn't love you.
I believe I must save my whole self for the one man to whom one day I shall belong.
Can't you love me, Gisela? Can't you love me?
No, not in that way.
I hate you, Gisela. It's going to rain. Put my hat on.
No, Paul.
The patient's obsessions exhibit an overwhelming antagonism, which showed itself in his overprotective attitudes. He removed the stone from the road to save her from injury, but he put it back, which exposed her to danger again.
Dear God, protect my father and Gisela. Amen.
Dear God, please don't protect them.
God, protect my father and Gisela. Amen.
No, don't protect them.
Protect father and Gisela. Amen.
Don't protect them.
Father
No,
and Gisela.
don't
Amen.
protect them.
Father
Don't.
and Gisela. Amen.
No, don't.
Father and Gisela.
don't.
Amen. Gisela. Amen. Gisela.
No.
Amen. Gisela. Amen.
No, don't.
Gisela.
No, don't.
Amen. Gisela. Amen.
No, don't.
Gisela. Amen. 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 Gisela. Amen.
In his prayers, he tried to ward off what he considered to be his evil thoughts, his lustful thoughts towards Gisela, by a protective prayer, Glegisamen. He could say it so quickly that no evil thoughts could obtrude. But typically, the protective word contained the very thing it was actually supposed to ward off. Now the word Glegisamen, constructed from the two words, the name of the girl, Gisela, and the Amen, By repeating it rapidly over and over again, it became Glégissime, 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 Glégissime. Or to put it bluntly, he had masturbated with her image. I had been seeing him for 6 months, and it was shortly after this that we reached a very difficult period in the treatment.
The patient's hostility towards his father, already present in his attitude to his brother and his girlfriend, began to reveal itself in his attitude to Freud. The patient, unaware of the significance of his behavior, began to transfer his emotions onto the analyst and live out in the consulting room the experiences still buried in his unconscious.
And what do you want to talk about today?
Something's been troubling me at the back of my mind. I haven't told you that when my father died, or shortly afterwards, my mother suggested that I should marry a cousin of mine. When my father had been alive, he suggested it too. He wanted it. She was very rich and would have been a good match. Everybody said, what a brilliant opening for me, but it meant nothing to me. I fell ill. The idea was dropped. I couldn't work. That's not what I wanted to talk about at all. I want to talk about a girl that I met on your stairs a week ago. She was extremely pretty. She had the prettiest eyes. She made me very excited. What are you doing this for? What are you doing to me? Why do you put your daughter on the stairs to excite me? I trusted you as a friend. But you're being nice to me because you want me to marry her. That's why you're being nice to me, because you want me for a son-in-law. I despise her. I hate her. I hate you so much. But I admire your cunning.
Aren't you transferring your dislike of the marriage prospect onto me? Isn't this the rich cousin your mother wanted you to marry? It's you who's promoting her into being my daughter.
You're so stupid. You suggest stupid things. But you're also clever. Oh, very clever at concealing your real desires. And you know she has beautiful eyes. So beautiful that I dream about her.
Freud attached great importance to dreams as a means of fathoming the unconscious. Because we're asleep and our conscious mind is off guard, the actions in our dreams, correctly interpreted, give a clear indication of the repressed wishes and anxieties buried in our unconscious mind.
No.
What you're so interested in is not her beautiful eyes, but her money. In your dreams, the girl you take to be my daughter stands for the rich cousin your family wanted you to marry. The cow dung is a symbol for money.
So's a cow's arse.
Money is dirty, something you despise. Yet also something which you desire, because it's always been to get money to marry that you wanted your father dead.
You disgust me.
Because you've made me into the father that wants you to marry this rich cousin, and you're angry about it. It brings back all the old conflicts in your mind. Should you remain faithful to Gisela, the girl you love,
Or should you marry this rich cousin as your father wanted? You can't decide. And to avoid facing the problem, you became ill. You couldn't work because you didn't want to work. If you qualified as a lawyer, the arrangement was that you should marry this rich cousin. But you didn't want to. And that's why it's taken you 9 years to get your degree.
After my father died, I used to work very hard, even though I found it difficult. I wanted to work so that I could marry. And I'd work late into the night. Exactly at midnight, I'd open the door of my study for my father to come in. But he never came. And then I did a crazy thing. I'd take off my clothes and examine my private parts in the mirror.
These are the two sides of your unconscious love-hate relationship expressed in a single obsessional act. You wanted to please your father by working hard so you could marry the rich girl, but at the same time be discovered defying your father, mentally masturbating as you did as a child.
About that time, I don't even remember when, my mother told me. My father came into my room and beat me for doing something naughty. I bit someone.
Your father's beating was linked in your unconscious mind with your sexual naughtiness.
I bit someone, and he beat me for it. You dirty, verminous rat!
Why don't you turn me out?
You're making me into the father you're so angry with.
No. No. No.
I won't hurt you.
Ah! Ah! No! Ah! Ah!
He hit so hard. He didn't know when to stop.
The boy will either be a great man or a great criminal.
I've always been tormented by criminal feelings, criminal impulses.
Gradually, the patient was convinced. The father he loved, he also hated.
My father died several years ago.
Then no harm can come to him.
Yes, I know that. But I'm still afraid for him.
He'd suppressed his hate since the age of 6, and it only showed itself in apparently unmotivated guilt and obsessional neurosis.
It was a rat. It had been having a meal off my father's corpse.
The treatment had reached its turning point. The path was now clear for a solution of his rat idea. Having accepted, after a struggle of 10 months, the love-hate relationship with his father, he was able to tell me things which meant I could reconstruct and explain the whole tangle of rat events.
The captain's rat story became the central reference point for a whole series of associations going right back to your childhood. and rats acquire a series of symbolic meanings. It's always been to get money to marry that you've wanted your father dead. Money is dirty, something you despise. So rats meant money.
So many florins for so many rats. When I was a child, I saw rats being beaten to death.
So the rat is you as a child.
He hit so hard, he didn't know when to stop.
Do you remember why he beat you?
I bit someone. He didn't know when to stop.
Thus, in the rat, the patient found a living image of himself. Captain Novak's cruelty and love of corporal punishment also recalled, unconsciously, his childhood beating. In his obsessional deliria, the patient immediately felt hostile towards his father. The rat torture should be done to his father. But he loved him, and to protect him, made a vow.
I must pay back the money to Lieutenant Alex, or the rats will get my father.
But it was a vow you knew you couldn't keep, because you knew you really owed the money to the girl at the post office.
The next day, I sent the money to the girl in the post office. She knew me. We liked one another. That's why she paid the postage for me.
Why couldn't you have gone straight to the post office and paid her yourself, personally? Because you were afraid. You were interested in the girl. You liked her. You thought of sleeping with her. But if you did, you would be unfaithful to the girl you loved, Gisela. But by giving up Gisela, you'd be pleasing your father, who, although he was dead, wanted you to marry your rich cousin. You unconsciously suppressed the fact that you owed the money to the girl at the post office, because it recalled conflicts that were too painful for you to remember. Conflicts that have torn you apart from the very start of your illness. Whether or not to remain obedient to your father, whether or not to remain faithful to the woman you loved. When we reached this solution, the patient's rat delirium disappeared. The mind of the obsessional neurotic is like a tree which proliferates its branches in all directions. But whichever leaf you start with, whichever twig, it always leads back to the root cause of the illness. In this case, the conflict between love and hate, which grew from the patient's unconscious belief that his father stood between him and his sexual desires. But when the repressed hatred of his father was uncovered, the conflict between love and hate was resolved, and the prominence of his normal personality was restored.
Freud's treatment of the rat man took 11 months. The cure was complete. There were no relapses. Freud himself and his colleagues recognized the case as a breakthrough. It proved the existence of infantile sexuality, had shown the formativeness of our early childhood experiences, and the influence in later years of those experiences buried in our unconscious mind. Freud's psychoanalytical ideas, largely supported by the evidence of the Ratman case, remain controversial, but, for better or worse, profoundly influential. Freud is one of the few men of whom it can genuinely be said he revolutionized our thought and our way of life.